What happens to a man's mind when winter never ends and the darkness becomes something that lives inside him? They tell you war creates monsters, that battle hardens men, that violence breeds violence. But they don't tell you about the quiet horrors, the ones that happen not on battlefields, but in forgotten villages, not from enemy fire, but from something far more insidious. This is the story my grandfather carried for 60 years before he finally spoke it aloud. A story about isolation, madness, and the terrible thing that happens when darkness, both literal and psychological, refuses to lift. And why, until the day he died, he could never bear to see snow falling after dark. My grandfather Thomas was 19 years old when he enlisted in the British Army in 1942. He'd grown up on stories of adventure, of seeing the world, of becoming a man through service to his country. He imagined North Africa, Italy, perhaps the Pacific Islands he'd read about in geography books. Instead, he got Switzerland. By late 1943, as Nazi aggression began testing Swiss neutrality, Britain quietly sent reinforcements to support the Swiss military. But Switzerland's government, desperate to avoid open warfare within its borders, ordered a series of tactical retreats, pulling troops deeper and deeper into the Alps away from potential conflict zones. That's how my grandfather's company, 42 men under Captain Morris, ended up stationed in Bergdorf, a village of roughly 500 souls nestled between two massive peaks in the Bernese Alps. It was early December when they arrived. The village sat in a natural basin, accessible by only two mountain roads that wound up from the valley below. Stone houses with peaked roofs clustered around a small church, smoke rising from chimneys into the gray afternoon sky. Beautiful country, Thomas remembered thinking. Shame about the war. He had no idea that beauty could hide its own kind of horror. The first blizzard hit 3 days after they arrived. Then another, and another. By mid-December, both access roads were buried under 7 to 9 feet of dense, compacted snow. The telegraph lines, their only communication with command, snapped under the weight of ice. They were cut off, completely. Captain Morris gathered the company in the church they'd converted into barracks. He announced, "We maintain our position. We defend this village as ordered. When spring comes, we'll re-establish contact." But winter in the Alps doesn't surrender easily. January arrived. The bare trees on the mountainsides looked like skeletal hands reaching toward a sky that remained perpetually gray. Due to the village's position between two peaks, direct sunlight only touched the streets for 2 or 3 hours each afternoon. They lived in twilight, perpetual dusk, the kind of darkness that seeps into your bones and settles there. My grandfather remembered the feeling. He said, "It was like living at the bottom of a grave." The first incident occurred in late January. A local woodworker reported that someone had stolen lumber from his shed. Then a woman discovered her winter vegetables, carefully stored in her root cellar, had been taken. Small thefts, annoying, but not alarming. Then the heirloom disappeared. A man named Klaus Fischer burst into the church, agitated, speaking rapid German that none of the British soldiers could understand. Finally, Private Davies, who'd studied German at university, translated. He says someone stole a ceremonial halberd that's been in his family for 200 years, hung above his fireplace, irreplaceable. Captain Morris promised they'd investigate, though what could they do? The village had no proper police, and his men weren't trained as detectives. But the thefts were just the beginning. On February 3rd, a boy named Emil, 8 years old, blonde hair, always playing in the snow, didn't come home for dinner. His mother searched. His father searched. Neighbors combed the streets, calling his name into the darkness. Nothing. Probably fell into a snowdrift or wandered too far and froze. Tragic, but explicable. Then another child vanished. A girl this time, 7 years old, taken from her yard while her mother was inside preparing dinner. Then another. My grandfather remembered the fear that settled over Bergdorf like a second winter. He said, the parents stopped letting their children outside. Windows stayed shuttered after dark. The village became a tomb where people still breathed. By late February, 3 children had disappeared. And that's when Private Reginald Fletcher went missing.
Reginald was 22 years old, quiet, kept to himself. Thomas remembered him as the kind of bloke you'd forget was in the room. He'd been on night watch when he vanished. His rifle was found propped against the church wall, his coat still hanging on its peg. But Reginald was gone. If a wolf or bear took the children, maybe, Davies said quietly over weak coffee in the church basement. But a grown man, a soldier, something's wrong here. Rumors spread through the company like fever. Human traffickers, despite the impassable roads. Desperate villagers selling their own children for food. Something ancient living in the mountains, awakened by the war. Captain Morris ordered nightly patrols. 3 men walking the streets from dusk until dawn. But the disappearances continued. Another child, then another. By early March, when the snow finally began to thaw, 7 children had vanished from Bergdorf. And the village felt haunted by more than absence. It felt watched. March 17th. My grandfather remembered the date because it was his 20th birthday. He was on patrol with Davies and 2 others, Corporals Manning and Price. Midnight had just passed when they noticed the figure. It stood outside the Fisher house, pressed against the window, peering inside. Tall, hunched, moving with strange, jerky movements. "Hey!" Manning shouted. "Stop!" The figure's head snapped toward them. For just a moment, Thomas saw its face in the moonlight. Pale, gaunt, eyes too wide. Then it ran. The patrol gave chase, their boots pounding through slush and ice, breath clouding in the frigid air. The figure was fast, inhumanly fast, sprinting toward the edge of the village where the snow still lay deep. "Stop, or we'll shoot!" The figure reached the snowdrifts at the village perimeter and simply disappeared, dove forward and vanished into the white. As they approached, Thomas realized it hadn't vanished. It had entered a cave, a hollow carved into the massive snowdrift. "Come out!" Davies shouted in German. "Come out now!" The response came in gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit the cave entrance. Bullets whined past. Without thinking, all 4 soldiers returned fire, their rifles thundering in the night air. Then silence. They waited, hearts pounding, nobody wanting to be the first to look inside. Finally, Manning volunteered. He drew his pistol, got on his hands and knees, and crawled into the darkness. When he emerged seconds later, his face had gone completely white. "Thomas," he whispered, "get Captain Morris. Get him now." My grandfather shined his flashlight into the cave instead, and saw hell. The figure they'd shot was Reginald Fletcher. He lay on his back in the cave, with a bullet through his heart, dead eyes staring at nothing. But he wasn't alone. The bodies of 7 children lay arranged around him, partially frozen, partially consumed. The stolen halberd rested against the cave wall, its blade dark with old blood. And scattered throughout the cave were the stolen items from the village: wood, tarp, food stores, blankets. Reginald had been building this place for weeks, making it livable, making it his. Captain Morris ordered the cave sealed immediately. The children's bodies were recovered under cover of darkness and returned to their families. The official story became that Reginald had been killed in action against an unknown threat. The cave was filled in, covered over, erased. "Can't let this get out," Morris said, hollow. "Can't let people know one of ours—" He couldn't finish the sentence. My grandfather never spoke about Bergdorf until 2004, 61 years later, when I found him standing in his garage, staring at falling snow through the window. He was crying. When I asked why, he finally told me everything. "You have to understand," he said quietly. "Reginald wasn't a monster when we arrived. He was just a boy like me. But the darkness, it was too much. The endless twilight, the isolation. Week after week of living in that grave between those mountains. Something in his mind broke. And when it broke, something else crawled into the empty space. I asked if he thought Reginald had gone insane. My grandfather was quiet for a long time. "I think," he finally said, "that there are places in this world where the darkness is so complete, so absolute, that it becomes something alive, something that gets inside you and changes you into what it needs you to be." He turned to look at me, and I saw the haunted look that had lived in his eyes for 60 decades. "We shot him, killed him, but I've never been sure we killed the right thing. Because after that night, I would see it sometimes, in other places, other wars. That same look in men's eyes when they'd been in the dark too long. The look that said something else was looking back." Here's the part my grandfather only told me once, the night before he died. When they were loading Reginald's body onto a cart to take back to the church, something fell from his pocket. A piece of paper, folded carefully. Captain Morris opened it. My grandfather saw it over his shoulder. It was a list, written in Reginald's neat handwriting. 7 names, the 7 children who'd been taken. But there were more names below those, crossed out, reconsidered. And at the bottom of the page, written and rewritten multiple times, circled over and over: Thomas, 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 Thomas. My grandfather's name. "He'd been watching me," he whispered, "deciding, thinking about it. If we hadn't caught him that night." He never finished the sentence. But I understood. The monster in the cave hadn't been caught because they were clever or brave. They'd caught him because they were lucky. And luck, in the dark of a Swiss winter, was the only thing keeping them human. If this story disturbed you the way it disturbed me when I first heard it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true horror stories from history. Share your own family's dark war stories in the comments, because every family has secrets from the wars, stories too terrible to speak out loud. Drop a comment if you're watching this during snowfall like I am. And remember, the monsters we create are often more terrifying than the ones we fight. The darkness we should fear most isn't out there in the world. It's the darkness that waits for its chance to crawl inside us. Until next time, stay in the light, trust your instincts, and remember that isolation is a weapon that cuts deeper than any blade. Because sometimes the scariest question isn't what's out there in the dark. It's what might I become if I stay in it too long?